there's everything that you do, and we're going to go through a couple of different ways of finishing your boat. I'm going to concentrate on paint, but everything that I do with the paint up here, you can do with varnish. Just be prepared to do it often.
Or keep it out of the sun.
Yeah, right. Or yeah, make sure that you keep it undercover.
And if you never use the boat, then it's easy.
Yeah, yeah. I mean, if you've got a place in the garage and you just keep the boat there, any of this
Works for me.
So, you're gonna want to plug your holes, plug all these holes. There's a lot of ways to do that, a lot of different materials to use. The best way to do it is with an epoxy filler because it's more permanent. There are water-based fillers, but I don't suggest that you use these. I'll kind of pass this around, and by the way, the club has got a stock of footwear here, which is a bearing compound that's been used to do a couple of these. And then, so up in the corner, you've got a sanded version of Quickbear. And then there's something that I had around 3 or 4 years ago. I think it's Wonderfill, which is a water-based product. And the thing that you gotta worry about with the water-based is that it is water-based. So if it gets wet, guess what? So you're gonna sand the whole boat to 120 grit, and then you're gonna prime it. And I've got some priming samples for you. This is sanded to 120, and then one coat of a water-based primer. And so, as you look at these, feel them. Just run your fingers across and see what they feel like. This is 2 coats of primer sanded between to 120.
Water-based.
And you'll see that you don't have full coverage on that. And these are all rolled and tipped. And then this last one, which is the one that we're going to use today, this has been sanded to 120. It's got 3 coats of primer on it. Wow. But it hasn't been sanded in between coats. And feel what this feels.
So that's a reasonable way to do it?
What you'll find is there's a whole lot more tooth on this one, even with 3 coats of primer, because that first coat tends to raise the grain, because this is water-based primer, an exterior water-based primer. And so the grain gets raised, and it never lays down. That's the purpose of sanding between coats. So you're going to save yourself some work doing that light sanding after the first coat.
But not after the second?
Huh?
Not after the second?
If you choose to go beyond you probably won't have to go
Oh,
beyond
I
the
see.
second coat. But if you do choose to go beyond, it's good to do just what we're doing here. Just feel it, and if it feels like it needs sanding, then it does. You know, some of this stuff is just so simple. I could do it. Tools. You're gonna want tack cloths. I love these things. When they're all dirty, you throw them in the washing machine and they're ready to go again. And they're cheap and they don't leave any contaminants on the surface. They're great. So these synthetic tack racks
And
are
there's
great.
a microfiber thing.
Yeah.
Now, what happens if you use an oil-based primer? Do you raise the grain as much, or does it raise it?
Probably
less?
not. Yeah. You may raise the grain a little bit, but not as much. And I've got a handout that you can choose. I've got a couple of different handouts. One is the family boat build handout. The other one is just some excuse me, but hopelessly out of date on the pricing, but a good sense of what the different materials are. And all I need is your name and email, and I will send you an electronic version of that.
When you're done with your final coat of primer, would you sand after that
Yes.
to open up the
Yeah.
tooth a little bit?
Yeah.
What grit on the final sand? Still 120?
Depending on the paint that you're using, 120 to 240. Okay, we're gonna sandpaper, sanding blocks. Today we'll use this sanding block because I like it. And you can use it with your just it's a 5-inch disc. But it can be as simple as a block. Always use a block when you're sanding because it distributes the pressure across a larger area and everything just stays flat. And in fact, I don't know, I've got a couple others around here too. Paper towels, gloves. You always want to use gloves, even with water-based paint. Paint tray, rollers, and brushes. Today, we will be using this really high-tech foam brush that costs you about $1. And with paintbrushes, especially for varnishing, you can spend as much money as you can to buy brushes. If you look for a foam brush with a really fine grain and some sort of a stiffener inside, this has got a plastic stiffener in there. This is just about the best you can do unless you're using 2-part finishes or epoxy, because this will literally melt with the 2-part finish. Then the next thing to know is when you're painting your boat, you gotta dress the part, all right? I mean, you want to have long pants, long sleeves, old shoes that you don't mind having a little polka dot pattern from your from whatever color your boat is. Basically, nothing that you care about, nothing that you're gonna meet the queen in. Okay? Just protect yourself.
Those Tyvek suits at Ace are fairly inexpensive.
Yeah, a Tyvek suit.
And they can, same one can last for years.
And
You
if
can
you
epoxy
buy
it, too.
from, like the Total Boat people, which I think is Jamestown, very often they include a Tyvek suit with the paint that you buy. So let's talk about these primers that we have. You basically have 3 groups of primers. Send this around. There's and anything that you use on your boat really needs to be exterior grade. And I'm going to throw in the caveat that we're making the assumption for this little program that your boat is going to be kept out of the water. It can be stored as easily as just inverted on sawhorses in the backyard with a tarp over the top. But it's basically not going to be exposed to water constantly, and it's not going to be exposed to a lot of UV. So, which is daylight. If your boat's going to stay in the water, if you've got a summer place on a lake and you want to leave the boat in water, what we're talking about here does not apply. All right. So you basically in descending order. You've got marine-based, most usually epoxy primers, and those come in both water-based and standard epoxies, which need thinners. That would be like the gold standard. Oil-based exterior, and companies like Zinsler and who's the other one? You've got 321 and Kills. There's the other one. But they have both interior water-based, exterior water-based, which I think is interior exterior, and then they've got an oil-based exterior. And then finally, what's been passed around here is water-based exterior. And the water-based exterior is actually pretty good stuff and easy to work with, really nice material. Again, it's not the primer to use if you're going to leave the boat in the water. And how do you choose? Well, that's kind of up to you. But going back to what I first said about the 90%, 90% of the work is going to be in prepping the boat, getting the primer on, making sure that primer is dead flat, and doing all those little things that you do to get a really good paint job. And if you use the cheapest materials that we talk about here and do a really good job of prep, you're gonna end up with a better finish than if you use the most expensive materials and don't give a crap about primer. So, the rule on sanding the boat is that you sand until you're sick of it, and then go home, have a beverage of choice, get up the next morning and do it again. You do that 2 or 3 cycles and you've probably got good prep. Now, I'll talk a little bit about varnishing right now because some of you are going to want to varnish, and I highly recommend not varnishing your entire boat. So, when you varnish, the prep is the same, except that my preference is to take it to 220 minimum. On this, and I'll pass this around. Here you've got, this has been sanded to 240 up here. This has got 1 coat of primer. 2 coats, 3 coats, 3 coats, 4 coats, 4, same way, up to 7 coats here. Now, the reality of varnish is if your boat is going to be sitting out in the weather all the time, in the Pacific Northwest, where we have relatively mild conditions, then you should start out with a minimum of 8 coats of varnish, and you should refresh it once or twice a year. Yes.
Are you talking about over bare wood, or would that be also true over epoxy wood?
No, over bare wood or epoxy.
Either one? You still
Either
got to
one.
put 8 coats?
Yep.
Oh.
Because the epoxy, no UV protection.
Right, right.
And what you're doing is you're getting UV protection, which 1, 2, 3 coats, you get that. I mean, you have very little. and so all I'm trying to convey here is that if you want to do a proper varnish finish, it's a lot of work.
Yeah, I mean, those boats up there had 4 coats of man o' war, and it didn't even fill the grain of the plywood.
Right. Yeah. Yes.
Are those, what is the finish? Is that a gloss or a satin or
This is a gloss.
gloss? Is that what you'd recommend?
Yeah. Yeah. So,
But I think that depends on the brand, because then on another boat, I used Pettit's varnish, and they say it'll put it on 1.5 mil with each coat.
Yeah.
And after I did the wood sealer, and 2 coats had filled the grain and put a gloss on it.
Yeah. Yeah. But you don't have the protection for UV if it's sitting outside all the time. Now, if you've got a garage queen, if it's sitting in the garage all the time and you take it out and use it for an application, you can probably get away with 5, and you're going to be refreshing it every 2 or 3 years with 1 or 2 more coats. And so, unless you just really like the varnish, and so when you do your varnish, there's a lot of you get a lot of different advice, and so mine will probably be different. On that first coat, which sometimes you get the advice to thin up to 50% on that first coat. And 25% thinner is as far as I will go. Because what you want to do is you want to get some penetration and some fairly quick cure out of that first coat.
What are you thinning with?
With mineral spirits.
Mineral spirits.
Assuming it's a standard varnish. And then sand that first coat to 240. Second coat, if you thin it 10% max, and again, and then, you know, what I've got in my notes here is from coats 3 to infinity. Just keep going with straight stuff. So now we've kind of left we're going to leave the varnishing at that. If you've got questions on varnishing, I'm happy to answer it. But now let's talk about paint. And we're not going to talk about any of the two-part finishes. Two-part finishes get into a lot more equipment. You should be using a respirator. You definitely want to have that Tyvek suit. You don't want to, you don't want to mess with this stuff because it'll kill you. So we don't really recommend. I don't recommend using two-part finishes unless you are sure that you have done your research and you know what you're doing. One part marine finishes are pretty good, and they are like and they vary. The polyurethanes, again, you should be using a respirator, but they're easier to use. So if you use something like Easy Epoxy, to me, the sweet spot are the alkyd enamels, like the George Kirby, and basically they're oil-based enamel finishes, and they hold up extremely well. They're repairable, and as we talked about, and they're relatively easy to use. And because I wanted to look good for this, we are going to be using an oil-based enamel from George Kirby today. And then there are water-based, and in other words, latex, like think house paint, okay? You can get them in a variety of sheens. If the boat is going in the water and then taken out, they're perfectly acceptable. Porch paints are pretty tough. And if you look around, there's a whole lot more houses than boats. And so if you don't think that they've done their homework on putting together those house paints, well, I don't know what to tell you. It's going to be a good, durable finish, but not if it's going to be in the water all the time. So we where did those varnish samples go? And I need a volunteer.
You're a lucky guy.
Wow. Man, he disappeared fast. Okay, so Senate, I can't get you to volunteer.
No, I've already been painting for like a week and a half.
Oh, come on. I don't want you to paint, I want you to sand.
No kidding. That's
Okay,
the worst.
so we're gonna take this sample that was prepped with 3 coats, no sanding, got 120 grit. We're gonna sand with the grain. And you can see, actually, I should pass this around. Okay, I'm gonna pass this around while I go get some denatured alcohol. And take a look, you can actually see where the grain was raised.
Well, there's 80% of the work right there.
There we go.
90.
90, that's
Yeah.
right, yeah.
Right. Actually, you can get, if you got Medicare and United Healthcare, you can get gloves for, a box of gloves for free. Okay, so. Anytime I open a can, I date it with the month and the year. This was originally used in May of 2019, over 5 years ago. It was stored, and there's barely any paint in here. I mean, it's like 3/4 of an inch, maybe. But it was stored just nothing special, just inverted. So that all of the solids basically ended up right there. And so I was able to, a few days ago, just take this and scrape off this scum of like 3/4 of an inch of pigment and put it back into the can, mix it up, and we're good to go. And that's pretty great.
You didn't get a skin forming on the other side of it?
Yep.
You did?
Yeah, you can see it right there.
So
Okay.
you just left it there? Or?
Yeah, I just ignored it.
Oh,
Now, notice I'm using a mixing stick and I'm lifting off the bottom because this has been sitting straight up.
It'd be tricky, you could pour it through a stream.
You could. And if it was varnish, I would be. Always. So, have we got that?
all right.
Now, we are gonna have some audience participation here. And all the denatured alcohol is gonna do is it's gonna help us to pick up some of this sanding dust. And we'll
Would
let
you ever
that-
use paint thinner for that?
Yeah, on occasion. I like the denatured alcohol because it will pick up it'll pick everything up and it dries really quickly.
Mm.
You don't have to
Wait for the paint thinner.
Yeah, and if you're gonna use a water-based paint, always use the denatured alcohol.
I can guess
Otherwise,
why.
Yeah, it's that whole oil and water thing.
Yeah.
Not mixing. Okay, today we are using an 1/8" foam roller. This is good for oil-based paints. You could use it on water-based, but probably not a good idea. It doesn't hold enough. And actually that cover will do epoxy. Now that this has probably dried completely, and you'll be able to feel it, just tack it off. And then this, the grain is running along here. This seems crazy, but you're gonna roll the paint on across the grain.
Why?
Because the whole point of the rolling process is to get a uniform layer of paint and to spread it out. Then, with your tipping brush should have just a little paint on it. Then to flatten this out completely, see, there's one of those goobers that Mike warned us about. Here's the audience participation. Please come up and feel what this feels like when you tip it off. Hmm? Ah, I love it. That's right. And it's just a very light stroke. And the whole point of this and it's not gonna be perfect because it's the first coat. And you're gonna do at least one, probably two more coatations. Yeah, you there? But see how lightly you have to touch that? Yeah. Who else would like to try this? Now, one of the things that this, yeah, that's great. Thanks.
I do this, but
You know, yeah, but I mean, look, you're doing it with somebody else's paint. This is great.
That's right.
You know. Well,
This is Tom Sawyer and Huck Finn thing?
Yeah.
yeah, yeah.
God, this is fun.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Want us to paint the
Too
sign
bad-
and go
too
over
bad-
at it?
Too bad this isn't, too bad that, you know, this isn't something useful.
you don't mind going one direction and back the other way and back and forth like
No,
that?
no. No, the whole goal is to get that uniform, thin layer of paint.
Well, here's my thinking. When you go in, you know, one direction, usually you're tilting the brush one way or the other that digs a hole.
Mm-hmm.
And so then if you come back the other way, you're probably gonna dig it on the other side and not fill the hole. But if you go back over it, you can tip it in such a way that, I don't know, that's probably ridiculous, but
Well, I don't know, it sounds
a little too OCD maybe.
When John was tipping it, because of where I'm sitting,
uh-huh.
when you were holding the brush over, you can see that the brush is not straight across. So when
Mhm.
you were pulling it, I could see it touching on the edges, but not in the middle because
Oh,
the brush was
Uh-huh.
down lower and maybe didn't have as
Yeah.
much pressure. So
And
you can
and
see that it's got an arc to
here,
it. Yes,
yeah.
yeah,
So that was poor technique on my part, in other
Yeah.
words.
Actually, I was
Yeah.
able to
you're fired.
take a trim in the bandsaw and cut that soft foam off right along the line of where the core reinforcement is. So it has even reinforcement, the
Mhm.
painting surface.
yeah.
But don't do it now.
Not now.
Unless you want to take it
No,
home,
the bandsaw
do it on
wouldn't
your
like it,
bandsaw.
Neither would the brush.
It would seem like the bandsaw would make a rough edge, but
Yeah, I would think so too.
Yeah.
But it gets rid of the
But,
difference
yeah,
in application across
Oh,
the
I see,
contact
yeah.
surface.
yeah. And,
I would
Care
normally
with
be
the-
using
you know,
a bristle brush
these-
anyway, not a foam brush.
these I've been buying from
Yeah.
Woodcraft, and, you know, they sell 10 of them, and I think 10 of these 4-inch are about $10. And I've had really good luck with them as far as being,
Do you clean them or just throw them away when you're done?
they're gone, yeah. They don't clean up all that well. So, now, I guess the last little piece I would want to share with you is these are 9-inch rollers that have been cut to 3 inches on the bandsaw. Okay, so I don't know. A 9-inch roller costs you, if the 9-inch roller costs you $3, a 3-inch roller costs you 2.5. Okay, it's kind of the way it works. So if you're careful with your cutting and your cleanup, because you don't want any of that dust on your rollers, this is a really great way to go with any roller. In fact, we have to pass one of these around.
Mark?
That's an 1/8 inch. They come in 1/8 and 3/16.
Just a real thin, not heavy nap, real thin.
Yeah. Look at
Mark, would you use the 3 inch even on a large surface like the bottom of your boat? No, you go to a bigger roll.
I'll be rolling this with a 9-inch roller.
Will you try to roll the whole bottom and then tip it, or do you roll and tip as you go?
You'll roll and tip in sections that you can deal with. And that's gonna depend on how much open time you have, before the paint starts to set up. And that's where good old alkyd enamels are wonderful, because they take a long time to set up. and they give you just a little more time to deal with it.
As opposed to like easy epoxy and things like that, do they set up
Yeah,
faster?
which will tend to set up much faster. I've got a 2-part polyurethane on Mojo. And when I do touch up, the good news is it's really easy to touch up. But the bad news is you mix just a little bit of that stuff and it's toxic. And number one. But it doesn't last long because it starts setting up right away. It'll be set up to where you can sand in an hour or two.
Wow.
I mean, it's crazy. So
Would you go water-based? Would you use a 3/16 roller?
water-based, I would probably go to something more like what I'm gonna pass around now. And this is mohair. And it's Worcester, it's pretty good quality.
I've seen them. I've got them.
You've probably seen it.
Yeah. And I suppose if you wanted to go into barbering, it could come into hand.
Or hang it on the Christmas tree.
And,
Yeah.
yeah. But if you feel that it's a really dense mohair, some people try to clean those up.
Not worth it. No.
Yeah. Because like that one I bought at Sexton's, so it was like $6.50. But if you buy them like a dozen at a time online, you can buy them for $4.50 or something like that. So.
You're gonna have quite a few to buy when painting a boat your size.
Yeah.
Mark, do you have a preference of the mohair or the foam?
Yeah, it all depends on what I'm doing.
On the application?
Yeah. So I like the mohair. Like on this, I wouldn't try to use foam because there's just too much real estate. And the mohair will tend to hold more paint. And that just keeps you going. And it went from white to green, which was the goal here. All right. And
You don't gotta pass it around?
well, I could. Does everybody have their painting clothes on? So, and that's all I've got. That's what it's all about. And if you were gonna do varnish and roll and tip, you would do it exactly the same way. And the beauty of doing it like this is I mean, it's easy to get a good finish on this horizontal piece. When you turn it up like this, it becomes a bit more difficult
Mm.
because you have a tendency to have it sag. And, and as we used to call it, hang curtains. It's not good, you know, where you got the big sag.
How do you, is there a way to minimize that?
Thin coats
Thin coats,
more often,
okay.
yeah.
Sanding
more
between
often.
the coats.
Yeah, and make sure that if you get a sag, then you get it out. You know, if you get a sag, then you gotta let it cure and
Sand it out.
Sand it till it's flat. Because any little ripple is gonna on a vertical surface is gonna recreate itself.
I've had good luck using a cabinet scraper to get rid of them.
Oh, yeah.
It's a little easier than sanding. You know, you don't necessarily have to gouge into the paint next to it.
Yeah, yeah. If you're good enough with a cabinet scraper. Otherwise, you could make a hell of a mess.
That's true.
So, that's all I got.
Thank you, Mark.
Thank you.